Addiction is a tough topic to talk about, but it's important that we do. We're Tom and Stacey Bartley, and we've just come off a podcast episode on our live radio show with an incredible guest, Nicholas Mathews, who happens to be not only a recovered addict himself, but he also has opened recovery centers in Southern California. So he's now helping others recover with addiction as well.
Yeah, and this is just, again, a very, very difficult topic for many of us to talk to. And there's 21 million Americans. That's the latest statistics that we cited. And only 10% of that 21 million have sought out treatment and been effectively stepped into a treatment program. So the bottom line there is most of us probably have, not too far outside of our immediate circle of influence or circle of influence, someone that is dealing with an addiction problem and that has not had any kind of success in dealing with it.
And I just want to say this is a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts here, both personally and professionally. Not only do we help many clients in the mediation aspect of helping them have the conversations that are critically necessary for recovery, but we also have lived this journey personally in previous relationships. I had a person that I loved and adored struggle mightily with addiction. And many of us have, friends and family members, business partners, et cetera, that are struggling or in the throes of this. And regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, from the person who's not personally struggling, it's like, just stop doing this thing. Right. And everything is going to be fine. And from the person who's doing it, it's like, you just don't understand where I'm coming from, right? I need to do this. It's a survival mechanism.
So yeah, so there's two very important dynamics, and depending where you find yourself on which side of the aisle, so to speak, the person that is struggling with the addiction or the supportive spouse or intimate close partner. And again, Stacey, I like Stacey have, very, very closely walked with this situation in my first marriage as well. So this is where we find people. Many people come to us, and Nick talked about where and cited some, whether we did, I can't remember, but there's some very, very, where addiction is and mental health, they walk side by side. And many times people with mental health challenges use alcohol or other places to manage their incredible pain.
Yeah. And then all addiction comes from a place of trauma.
Place
right?
of trauma.
PTSD is a huge pusher for addiction and coping. And it makes sense when we start to understand it. And sometimes that's the challenge, is getting to the place of understanding. It takes some emotional regulation, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. And so getting to that place of understanding, when we can really hear what it is that's emotionally driving this conversation, when we can, it really all starts to make a lot of sense.
Right. So where we really tried to hone in and offer value and takeaways for our listeners was, how about, where we're, again, specific to our intimate relationship, one of the partners is dealing with addiction and the other is not. You hear a lot about codependency. That's a trigger type terminology. And we asked Nick, how do we navigate that?
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's just talk about a little in regards to what codependency is. I mean, codependency is this fine line between me caring for you as my person, as my partner, as my lover, my spouse. And I see that you're struggling and I see that you're hurting and I want to support you and be there for you. And when I hear a little bit of hope, it keeps me engaged in this, thinking it's going to all turn around. It's going to be okay. And surely you see the problem and okay, I'll give you that time, 6 weeks, 10 months, 10 years. It can often turn into that pretty quickly. We feel like we're being that loving, supporting spouse. And yet why doesn't that take us to the promised land, right? Why is it that being that loving, supporting spouse often not only doesn't solve the problem, but drives the addiction on the other side? And Nick had some really great things to say about that. And we see it in the work that we do too, babe. I mean, and even personally, I can relate back to just thinking, I just need to love them and support them enough. I just need to be more empathetic and more understanding. And if I would get just a little bit of hope, like all you had to do was just give me a drop of, I love you. I understand I have a problem. Just give me a little more time. I'm dealing with this and this and this right now. And then I promise we're going to address this and we're going to take care of this. And that would turn into, not next week, but then next month. And then next month would turn into 10 years later. We're still having the same conversation. And there's some nuances there in that line where if it's constantly being pushed out, then we're probably not making any progress. That's actually you being used to the benefit of the addict. and he's buying, or him or her are buying themselves time to just use again because they're not ready to address the problem. And they're giving you a little teeny tiny snippet of hope to keep you in the game and supporting them. And that's a classic example of what codependency is.
Yeah, he shared a very, very powerful example with his own mother, and his own mother, I think it was like 17 years old, and kept it, again, when we teach this in our body of work and frameworks, she kept it totally on him, said nothing about, she kept it totally on her and said nothing about him. And I'm paraphrasing, you can listen to the whole episode, but said that I am no longer willing to come home and find my son dead. So you need to be out of the house by the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, if you got to keep it into your I statements. And so I pressed him in a very respectful manner, like, do you find oftentimes us non-addictive spouses are giving too much time? And he really said, it's hard to say, Tom, but the bottom line is you have to decide for yourself. He said, I'm looking at my notes, for you and not them. So you define the boundary for yourself. And he said, look, I'll be absolutely honest with you. Setting a boundary for those that you love the closest is unbelievably difficult.
100% agree. It is incredibly difficult. And yet I just want to, and we did a lot of conversation around this topic because it's so important and it's so difficult and it's such a mind bender. We kind of tend to think, if I'm a loving spouse, if I'm a loving person, then I'm going to support you through this very difficult situation. I mean, that's what a good partner would do, right? I mean, come on, don't ask me to like draw a hard line in the sand. And if I do, just give me a reason to keep pushing it out, because the reality is I don't want to leave this relationship. I do love you. I do care about you, right? The last thing I want to do is blow up our family and our relationship.
Well, I can just flat out tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it's the hardest decision I have ever made in my life. Hardest ever. So
and yet not doing it is not life-giving to anybody.
Exactly.
There's a very fine line between breakthrough and breakdown, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, if the most powerful thing we could impart to you as you're listening to us, and if you want to find the whole episode, please do so. But what Nick imparted to us was, look, you have to decide if you're the spouse that's in relationship, husband, wife, close partner, your significant partner that's struggling with addiction. Don't worry about anything they're doing, because oftentimes he said very transparently and very honestly, an addict will do anything they need purely for their own self. So keep it on what is important and non-negotiable for you. We teach this in our frameworks. I know I've said that. Keep it around I, not you and your I statements and how I feel. And this no longer works for me. And
I'm not doing this because you're doing this, because right. You felt here, because this was a problem, because you've wrecked the car, because you've got another DUI, because, you mistreated our son. It's like,
you've lost your job, you spent all our money, whatever that is.
I am no longer willing to do this with you.
Just like his mom said, I am no longer willing to come home and find my son dead. You need to be out of your house by the end of the day. And he said, there was really nothing I could refute, even though as hard as that was for him to hear, he was only 17.
Well, and the point here is the intent with where it's coming from. If the intent is to make them pay because of all the frustration and difficulty that you've experienced in your family, I need you to relook at what it is you're no longer willing to personally tolerate and plant a flag there.
And we asked him another question in his experience, both personally and professionally. Again, he's very, very, as a very, very well-regarded, body of work and center down in Southern California. Is it possible for someone that's struggling with an addiction problem to do it on their own? He says potentially, but I've seen people that have just decided they're not going to drink anymore. But then I love what he said. They have what they call white knuckle sobriety, meaning they've just decided to stop, but the behavior is still there. So the bottom line is you absolutely have to have treatment and absolutely have to have support, and you need to find a mediator. And what does a mediator do? They establish safety and permission around very difficult situations that oftentimes have never been able to be talked about, never been able to be even broached as a family, as a relationship. And this is what we specialize in doing.
Well, and as things come up, and they're going to on the path to true healing and true sobriety and true recovery, there are many conversations that need to be looked at and understood, like this whole experience needs to be digested down from many different angles and perspectives. And that's the value of what it is a mediator can give to the contribution while somebody is going through rehab, while somebody is potentially working the 12 steps. And again, there's many, many roads to recovery here, but the idea that you're going to be able to do this on your own is a misnomer. Because the thinking that has got you here to this place is not going to be the thinking that is going to turn it around. We need fresh perspectives and support and help. And I love to liken this unto you having a physical problem. Like if I had a problem with my digestion and I don't understand how digestion works, how in the world do you ever think that I'm going to be able to remedy that? I'm going to raise my hand and say, hey, please, I know that this is my problems, my symptoms. I'm going to go to somebody who understands digestion. I'm going to go to somebody who understands how to work me out of this because I am limited in my own understanding and ability and know-how.
And I'm just looking at my notes. He said so many vignettes. I mean, so many incredible nuggets of wisdom. He said, you can't do it alone if you're the problem. I mean, let's just be honest. So again, this
something very profound. I would love for you, and you've got the notes here to talk about as far as like the isolation and that progression. I think that was very profound.
Yeah. He said, I mean, the classic case of this is isolation and infinite uniqueness is the ultimate defense mechanism, meaning we think that, we're the only one that has this problem and we're going to be able to figure it out on his own. And he was very candid. And he said, look, he will really flat out challenge, people that he works with. He says, do you think that your problem is so unique that I wouldn't have any ability to put my arms around it? He says, you're highly, you're being delusional, if you will. He didn't say delusional, but I am. But I mean, again, it's that 8 degrees of separation. And especially, it's amazing what he had shared, what the addict will do behaviorally with their behavior. Even he said, I will use a human just like I would use heroin, just strictly for my own regard, and toss him or her out of my life if they're not giving me what I need. I mean, I think, wow.
Yeah. That kind of is a sobering thought.
So this is a serious situation. It's a complex situation. It's one that is very near and dear to Stacy's heart. But the bottom line, he also said you need to have a mediator. I can't overstress that because it's the first time, and most people don't know what that means. And really, in just very layman terms, is a mediator is an expert at establishing safety and permission. And a mediator a good mediator especially, doesn't take sides. So meaning everyone is going to be heard, everyone is going to be understood, and we're going to figure out a way to put the pieces back together in a way that works for everyone.
Absolutely. It's an emotional solution to an emotional problem.
Right.
All right.
Episode 78, if you want to listen to the whole thing.
That's where I was going.
We'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.